On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a massive, coordinated air campaign over the Middle East. Operation Epic Fury targeted the core of the Iranian state. The objective was to dismantle the country's military leadership, its nuclear facilities, and its comprehensive air defense network. To bypass those air defenses, the Pentagon deployed advanced stealth assets. These aircraft flew continuous, radar-evading sorties to penetrate deep into Iranian airspace. The immediate tactical execution was effective. A decapitation strike killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei alongside scores of senior government and military officials. Within days, U.S. forces claimed air superiority over key regions. Yet, this tactical success immediately resulted in a strategic stalemate. Absolute military supremacy in the air proved insufficient to secure victory. The reason comes down to geography and economics. A superpower's ability to dominate the sky does not inherently translate to the ability to secure a global geo-economic choke point on the ground. A primary objective of Operation Epic Fury was to neutralize Iran's conventional naval capacity and sever the communication networks used to monitor maritime traffic. U.S. naval destroyers bombarded coastal infrastructure with Tomahawk cruise missiles, systematically dismantling heavily fortified bases along the shoreline. The loss of hardware was immense. Over 120 Iranian blue water naval vessels were destroyed or incapacitated in the opening phases of the campaign. Critical naval facilities at Bandar Abbas, Chabahar, and Konarek were reduced to rubble. This blinded Iran's early warning architecture and radar installations across the Gulf of Oman. Without coastal support or command coordination, the Islamic Republic of Iran Navy ceased to exist as an open water threat. The United States achieved absolute conventional dominance. By systematically destroying the traditional fleet, they forced Iran to rely entirely on its unconventional tactics. While the conventional Navy operated in open waters, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGCN, held a specific mandate to secure the asymmetrical defense west of the Strait of Hormuz. This topographical map shows the physical reality of the Strait of Hormuz. The waterway looks wide from above, but the actual navigable shipping lanes for heavy commercial vessels are narrow and flanked by shallow waters. The IRGCN capitalized on this geography. They deployed swarms of fast attack craft and one-way explosive drones, launching them from hidden inlets. Simultaneously, they covertly sowed expansive minefields directly across those primary transit routes, physically blocking the passage. This strategy is known as anti-access and area denial, or A2AD. It relies on using cheap, highly distributed weapons to make an environment too hazardous for a multi-billion-dollar fleet to enter. The U.S. cannot simply send in vessels to clear the mines. Traditional minesweepers are slow and lightly armored, making them vulnerable targets for the dense network of anti-ship missile batteries positioned on the Iranian shore. That coastal defense grid was fully stocked. Prior to the war, U.S. intelligence estimated Iran was producing at least 100 ballistic and cruise missiles monthly. By refusing to fight a symmetrical naval battle they would inevitably lose, Iran successfully trapped the global economy behind a siege that conventional naval power has yet to break. The immediate result was a historic supply shock. The closure of the strait halted roughly 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas trade and 4% of global oil. Massive volumes of energy exports were stranded at their terminals, unable to safely reach the open ocean. This bar chart tracks the collapse of Gulf Cooperation Council exports. By early March 2026, collective oil production from Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates had dropped by 10 million barrels per day. Exporters declared force majeure, legally suspending their delivery obligations. Panic set in across the markets, forcing Brent crude past $120 per barrel. The crisis quickly shifted from energy markets to physical survival. The Gulf Cooperation Council relies on the Strait of Hormuz for over 80% of its caloric intake. With food imports severely disrupted, an emergency took hold. Retailers resorted to airlifting staples, resulting in consumer price spikes of up to 120%. This geo-economic contagion bypassed traditional military firewalls. Without deploying troops beyond its borders, Iran inflicted damage directly onto civilian populations and global financial markets. Recognizing their leverage, Iran expanded its target matrix beyond regional military bases, aiming directly at critical civilian tech infrastructure. They launched precise drone strikes against Amazon Web Services data centers in Bahrain and the UAE, threatening further attacks on facilities owned by Google and Microsoft to maximize financial pain. The shockwaves traveled east. The severe energy shortages and supply chain disruptions threaten Chinese investments, derailing nodes of the Belt and Road Initiative across the Middle East. This line graph demonstrates the correlation between the blockade and Beijing's domestic stability. China's export-driven economy relies on global energy stability. Standard modeling shows that every 25% rise in oil prices causes Chinese GDP to drop by 0.5%. However, Beijing offset these economic losses with intelligence gains. By observing U.S. carrier operations and logistics flows in the Gulf in real time, China gathered data for its own strategic planning regarding future maritime conflicts. The conflict demonstrated how a regional strike could generate intelligence windfalls for Beijing, while exposing the economic fragility of its global trade partners. The conflict settled into a tactical deadlock. The United States cannot reopen the Strait of Hormuz purely through continued airstrikes. To break the blockade, defense analysts proposed a naval convoy system, closely escorting tankers through the strait. But doing so places U.S. vessels directly in the crosshairs of shore-based missiles. An alternative strategy involves initiating a distant naval blockade, interdicting Iranian oil shipments to Asia in open waters to drain Tehran's remaining revenue. Neither option is politically simple. Internal pushback in Washington is growing as policymakers grapple with the escalating financial and military costs of Operation Epic Fury. The strategic reality highlights the underlying mechanics of asymmetric warfare. A low-tech barrier can effectively stall a high-tech superpower. In 2026, the neutralization of Iran's conventional fleet and central command did not restore the flow of trade. Even with its leadership decapitated and its navy decimated, a state positioned on a global choke point can still force a superpower to choose between a costly war of attrition or a global economic collapse. The conflict settled into a tactical deadlock. The United States cannot reopen the Strait of Hormuz purely through continued airstrikes. To break the blockade, defense analysts proposed a naval convoy system, closely escorting tankers through the strait. But doing so places U.S. vessels directly in the crosshairs of shore-based missiles. An alternative strategy involves initiating a distant naval blockade, interdicting Iranian oil shipments to Asia in open waters to drain Tehran's remaining revenue. Neither option is politically simple. Internal pushback in Washington is growing as policymakers grapple with the escalating financial and military costs of Operation Epic Fury. This strategic reality highlights the underlying mechanics of asymmetric warfare. A low-tech barrier can effectively stall a high-tech superpower. In 2026, the neutralization of Iran's conventional fleet and central command did not restore the flow of trade. Even with its leadership decapitated and its navy decimated, a state positioned on a global choke point can still force a superpower to choose between a costly war of attrition or a global